There's not many things in life that I'm afraid of. I think my fears are pretty reasonable, not necessarily odd. Like the fear of dying, or being stuck out in open water with no way out, or something being located on the top shelf that I have to struggle to reach. But one fear that I do have that I actually get ridiculed for, and it's not without, I understand why, is my fear of flying. I have a very intense phobia of planes. I don't have a fear of heights, it's just being on a plane. You don't need to spit all the facts at me. I know all the statistics. It's the safest form of travel. Really, it's the safest thing humans do on a regular basis. It's probably more safe than me sitting in this chair right now. I get all of that. I know it's an irrational fear, but I can't shake it. It's just deep seated. And I've flown 10, 15 times across the 29 years of my life, and every single time it's an anxiety inducing, miserable experience. I just absolutely despise it. Recently, I've started to feel kind of vindicated in this fear, though. Whereas before I was made the fool, people, painted me as a clown for being afraid of flying. They couldn't wrap their head around why I'd be afraid of it. Now there's been a lot of people coming over to my side over here because Boeing's been in some hot water. Their planes have just been falling apart in the skies, like the door blowing off, like all kinds of terrible things happening with Boeing's aircrafts. It's been aviation apocalypse for that company. And there was a Boeing whistleblower who was in an active lawsuit with Boeing who turned up dead under very peculiar circumstances. And now Boeing's CEO, as well as other top executives, are stepping down from the company, so it's just been this septic tank exploding with shit spraying everywhere here. A lot is going on behind the scenes at Boeing, and it's all very odd. Now, as most of you know, I run a show called Red Thread with Jackson and Windigoon, where we dive into cryptids, conspiracies, cults, and cold cases, and we recently tackled the Boeing whistleblower conspiracy, which is about the Boeing whistleblower not taking his own life, but actually being murdered by Boeing for revealing the Krabby Patty secret formula to their aircrafts, which is basically scrap metal. He was talking about all of these awful safety violations and oversights for their aircrafts where they were knowingly putting scrap metal onto their planes. They weren't following protocol. They were doing a lot of shady things, keeping a lot of things off the books on purpose to meet production deadlines. He was a higher up in Boeing when it comes to their aircraft safety and making sure everything functions properly. And he was really concerned and disappointed with how Boeing was handling things, so he started to reveal this information, break the magician's code, and now he's no longer with us. And the circumstances around his death are very odd. So I just wanted to talk about this and show you clips from that Red Thread episode because since a lot of you know I'm afraid of flying, I've been asked a lot about my opinion on Boeing and the whistleblower situation and all of that. And it's one that I've been paying extremely close attention to and following every step of the way. So here's all the Boeing whistleblower conspiracy information as well as my take on all of it. To really start picking apart the problems with Boeing, I think it's important to give a little bit of a history lesson behind them, so I'm going to play this clip from the Red Thread episode that kind of sets the stage for why everything changed so quickly for Boeing after a merger gone wrong with a fucking parasitic infestation that took over the company from the inside out. So, 1997, Boeing acquired McDonald Douglas, which is now often seen as a misaligned merger. The merger was worth over $13 billion. McDonnell Douglas had found it increasingly harder and harder to compete with Boeing and Airbus, lacking resources to be able to work on new product development, and this merger was Douglas's way out of the industry. At the time, Boeing had an engineering-first ethic which was quickly overpowered after this change by McDonnell Douglas's more profit money-making mindset. So you can see where the holes start to show here. And this is something that even in recent articles is mentioned quite a bit.
Well, it was a massive merger at the time. McDonnell Douglas had a significantly different ethos and organizational structure behind the scenes, which kind of explains probably why they were in trouble in the first place. Because
Yeah,
Boeing,
you would think.
Boeing succeeded over them because they put technological innovation ahead of business in most senses. I mean, they were still a profitable business, don't get me wrong, but they definitely focused a lot on the engineering side of things, engineering excellence. And then somehow they merge with McDonnell Douglas, and McDonnell Douglas is the one that's seen steering the ship from then on. That has never made sense to me. Boeing was the more profitable, more healthy company, and they kind of like saved McDonald Douglas in a way by merging with them, and then McDonald Douglas like kind of infects the company. It's never made sense to me.
I think it's just, I don't even think it's necessarily a product of the merger. It's a product of the time where everything became more profit driven. So McDonnell Douglas's like ethos of money making first probably is what was prevalent, not so much their structure.
Yeah, you're probably right.
So this is a very cool name. Harry Stonecipher, the Boeing CEO at the time of the merger.
Sounds like a Bond villain.
I know, it does sound like a Bond villain.
It's so cool. I love that name. I wish my last name was Stonecipher. It's so fucking sick.
That's an anime name. So he was determined to change the idea of the company from engineering firm to a proper business. Tens of thousands of jobs were cut, and Boeing moved from Seattle to Chicago in 2001. This was done to remove the Strategy Council of Business from being directly associated with other units of the company, thus allowing them to focus more on business decisions and long-term strategy plans without meddling from people actually building the planes. With this drastic change in the company, where now it was all about money making first, print as many doubloons as possible, Mr. Krabs is running Boeing, they started to throw safety and quality to the wayside, at least according to the Whistleblower and a lot of the things that were going on behind the scenes that were so shady. Now I want to continue setting the stage here because the problems for Boeing really started to escalate over the last decade or so. Boeing created the Maneuvering Characteristic Augmentation System, or MCAS, which is now an infamous system, which I'm sure we're going to talk about very soon. It's described as one of their biggest and most fatal mistakes. It was designed to be a flight stabilizing software that would automatically adjust the aircraft's flight controls under certain flight conditions, but Boeing refrained from telling many people about this system, including the pilots of the aircraft itself.
What could go wrong, right?
Whoa, what?
So, MCAS obtained its data from aircraft's angle of attack, the AOA sensor, which is used to measure the angle between the aircraft's relative wind and its longitudinal axis. This in turn would help MCAS determine if the plane is at risk of stalling, then triggering corrective actions. If by any chance the information relayed from the AOA sensors were wrong or the sensors were faulty, the MCAS system could erroneously send the plane into a fateful nosedive. This is exactly what happened on the Lions Air Flight 310 in 2008 and the Ethiopian Airways Flight 302 in 2019. Tragically, everyone on board both flights died.
Just for audio listeners, Charlie meant to say 2018 then. There wasn't a 10-year difference. Yeah, you said 2008. 2008.
Oh, sorry. I meant 2018.
Yeah. So anyone who was around at that time period, though, remembers when those two crashes happened because they were enormous in the news. It caused Boeing to ground all the flights. Hundreds of people died. It was a very tragic event.
Oh, man.
They also recalled the 737 MAX in response as well, if I remember correctly. They took the 737 MAX out of production for a little while, and I believe airports refused to fly them.
Yeah, for a 2-year period, I think. Yeah.
So the sensor read data wrong and like pulled against the pilot to adjust, which caused a crash.
So the AOA, the angle of attack sensor, which is a sensor on the peripheral, like the outside of the aircraft itself, could feed incorrect data to the MCAS system in certain situations, and then the MCAS system would operate on that incorrect information and essentially pull the plane.
Was there no way to override it? You would think
there was.
But since they didn't train the pilots on it and the pilots weren't aware of it, they didn't know they could override that system.
Dude.
So it just.
As we're going to get into, the reason as to why the pilots weren't educated about this is so infuriatingly greedy.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
So, Boeing had insisted to airlines that the pilots did not need any additional training to fly the new aircraft, and even more damning, all mentions of MCAS were removed from the operations manual that the pilots relied on. As Boeing was in a losing race against Airbus, the 737 MAX needed to fly exactly like the 737, so that pilots didn't have to go through new simulator training for certification.
And remember, just real quick, I didn't write this, but remember that it didn't fly exactly like the previous 737 because the engines were more forward on the plane, creating that tilt. So because of that, that's why they introduced the MCAS to offset that, so that it would fly as close to the 737 as possible.
You make a system that makes it feel like the old one.
Exactly, so they can avoid
accommodate for when that system doesn't work correctly. I see.
Yeah.
Training the pilots would have taken a lot of extra time, money, and would be unattractive to potential airline customers. MCAS was the supposed solution so that in certain, very specific situations, it would slightly adjust the aircraft to correct its flight position to create a more similar flying experience akin to the previous model that the pilots were used to. However, when this happened in the real world, pilots and MCAS were in a sort of fight with each other for controls, with pilots trimming the aircraft manually and then MCAS trimming it again, and this cycle continuing with the pilot unaware that there was a hidden system essentially acting against them. After the tragedies of the Lions Air and Ethiopian airline crashes, Boeing suffered a huge financial loss. In 2022 and 2023, they paid out over $1 billion to 737 MAX customers. They were charged with fraud as well as conspiracy and entered an agreement with the Department of Justice with the agreement that they were to pay over $2.5 billion. They also grounded the 737 MAX for nearly 2 years, with regulators conducting investigations, a move costing Boeing around $20 billion in fees and fines.
So they didn't end up making more money in the first place. They made these decisions to make more money, and now they've lost over $20 billion, which I'm not sure how much that is in the grand scheme.
They have
of
a
things.
net worth of $109 billion. So
that is actually substantial. Then
the negative publicity just continues to accumulate day by day. For example, one United Airlines Boeing 777 experienced a wheel loss during takeoff. Another United Airlines aircraft slid off the runway upon landing due to the landing gear malfunctioning. There's been multiple instances of flames shooting out of engines that have been reported. Certifications have reportedly been falsified. Debris has been discovered near electrical wiring. Loose parts have been found in door panels. Components from scrap bins have allegedly been reused in installations and constructions of planes themselves. A Boeing 777 was forced to land after hydraulic fluid was leaking during takeoff. Additionally, engineers have been outsourced for low wages, with some employees reportedly being paid as low as $9.50 an hour, and the FAA criticized Boeing's safety procedures as inadequate. And there's so many more that Jackson could have pulled from. Like 2 days ago, a Boeing flight engine blew up, caught fire, and they had to emergency land. A week ago, this one I think a lot of you heard, the door blew off of a plane mid-flight.
Yep.
That's the one I focus on, yeah.
Oh, so you have it right here. So, most recently, Friday, January 5th, 171 passengers and 6 crew members were aboard the Alaskan Airline Flight 1282 on a Boeing 737 MAX. They departed from Portland at 5:07 p.m. with no signs of stress or worry from the captains or flight staff. However, minutes later, as the plane reached an altitude of 16,000 feet, a loud bang was heard through the aircraft. A hidden emergency door and its cover, known as a door plug, was suddenly sucked out from the aircraft, leaving a giant hole in its wake. The change in pressure was so strong that if passengers were sitting in the seats directly at the impacted door, they would most certainly have been jettisoned. Mobile phones were ripped out of hands, a t-shirt was ripped off the back of a young boy, the plane's interior around the gap was torn apart to its core, and the surrounding seats bent and misshapen. There's just so many examples of Boeing planes malfunctioning in recent years as the quality of their builds have apparently diminished behind the scenes. So we focused a lot on that airline door being blown off. That was one we harped on a lot, and diving deep into how that happened and all of the negligence and just irresponsibility behind it. The main thing that contributed to that is they didn't put the fucking bolts in on it. Like, they didn't finish actually putting the bolts in on the door. It's from top to bottom, so much has gone wrong with Boeing. And it's led to concerned individuals like John Barnett, the Boeing whistleblower, coming out to tell the public, inform them about what's happening with Boeing and how dangerous it is.
Following this, Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun himself has encouraged customers to conduct their own reviews on 737.
Hey, we don't feel like paying for anyone to like check our shit. Can you guys just do it yourself and like let us know?
Just check the doors when you get on.
Encourages customers to check the bolts. Oh my gosh. Like, hey, next time you get onto one of our planes, just make sure all the screws are there. Yeah. You probably know where they're supposed to go.
Guys, it's probably fine, but don't take our word for it. In fact, we want you to do it yourself.
Yeah. And then in the court case, it's like, Your Honor, they checked the door. It's really their fault.
The onus was on them.
Every single passenger is deputized upon entering a 737 as an official certified inspector.
I'm going to assume, because Boeing's customers are the actual airlines and not us individually, so maybe he meant the customers as in the airlines conduct their own reviews, but even then,
I imagine.
That's still such a dodgy thing to say still, like, hey, you guys should check the doors.
It's funny to imagine.
We weren't looking.
when you sit down on a plane and the stewardess is giving you like the in-flight instructions, it's like, please ensure that all bolts and screws are in the correct place on the secret door you don't know you're sitting next to.
Yeah, when the oxygen mask dropped down during an emergency, they also drop an Allen wrench. It's like, okay, now everyone tighten your shit quick.
Out of the 89 audits conducted by Boeing, only 56 passed. They found that Dawn... What? No way.
A ridiculous amount of failure.
What? They found that Dawn dishwashing liquid was being used as a makeshift lubricant during door fittings, and a hotel key card was used to check a door seal, which are not approved practices.
I can't believe those aren't approved practices. Where does it say in the technical guidebook that you can't use Dawn dishwashing liquid? What are you meant to use then?
I love it's like the Air Bud argument. I mean, there's nothing in the rule book that says a dog can't play basketball. Why can't I use a hotel key card to check the door seal? John Barnett. He was an American-born aerospace engineer and longtime Boeing employee turned whistleblower. Born February 23rd, 1962 in Pineville, Louisiana, Barnett worked at Boeing for 32 years with a long stint from 2010 through 2017, working as a quality control manager for Boeing's 787 Dreamliner airplane at the South Carolina plant. As quality control manager, John was directly involved in ensuring each plane had passed supposed Boeing quality checklists, essentially being one of the few individuals who was innately aware and knowledgeable about Boeing's supposed commitment to producing reliable and safe aircraft. Due to stressful working conditions, Barnett's doctor advised that job-related stress would likely cause a heart attack unless he were to quit. He retired in 2016. Upon his retirement, John Barnett came forward to the press to make allegations about various claims of malpractice at Boeing. His initial claims first came to the BBC and included allegations that many employees were severely overworked and Boeing was not providing consistent and appropriate maintenance to the aircraft they were responsible for manufacturing. He also made the troubling evidence-based claim that the oxygen systems of the brand new Boeing 787 Dreamliner range of aircraft might be faulty or otherwise defective as a byproduct of lax maintenance at Boeing. He provided tests that showed a failure rate of 25% for the oxygen systems. In 2019, Barnett would appear in a New York Times article where he would go on to make further claims about metal shavings that posed a danger to the aircrafts themselves. Boeing denied all allegations made by Barnett. However, the FAA has since conducted several reviews that seem to corroborate Barnett's claims.
Yeah, 25% for the oxygen systems. So 1 in 4 people on those planes are not getting oxygen in the case of an emergency.
That's still a positive survival rate. That's acceptable losses.
It's not bad, and they wouldn't need oxygen anyway because the plane will be in a nosedive. So it's
yeah. What are they going to do? Tell someone?
Yeah, it's actually probably better for Boeing if no one gets oxygen, so that way there's no squealing.
Have you heard that old conspiracy theory that the reason you brace with your head against the chair in front of you in a plane crash is to immediately break your neck?
Oh yeah,
so you don't feel the pain of the crash. Or
yeah, the old Boeing survivors pose.
So then here's some more claims from Barnett. So, reprimanded for email usage, Barnett asserts that a senior manager reprimanded and downgraded Barnett for his usage of internal email services as a tool for expressing process violations in lieu of face-to-face conversations, which Barnett assumes had meant he shouldn't put problems in writing. This was seemingly a way for Boeing to avoid a paper trail of problems that Boeing would prefer swept under the rug, which is relevant with the Alaska Airline Flight 1282, which is the door blowing off, where Boeing apparently doesn't have any written documents pertaining to the faulty installation of the door module. Barnett also alleges that the manager pushed Barnett to get more used to working in the gray areas and help find a way while maintaining compliance. This speaks to a direct willingness and culture at Boeing where employees and managers are willing to sacrifice quality control to keep productivity high and ensure deadlines are met. Then there's also defective parts claims, where Barnett claims that a senior manager installed a defective, scrapped and dented hydraulic pipe in a plane. Barnett followed procedures and filed the complaint with Human Resources, which was unable to substantiate the claim after claiming they had followed through with an investigation. He also claims that he would go on to continuously raise issues of several more missing and defective airplane parts to management with the fear that they had either been accidentally or intentionally installed in aircrafts. Allegedly, management instead directed him to finish the paperwork on the missing parts without necessarily determining where they had gone.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
They fell into the
They'll
fucking
show
back
up.
rooms. Who cares? Just make note that they're missing. Barnett claims no further action was taken by managers. His claim that workers did not sufficiently follow component tracking procedures with the goal of preventing delays on the production line was backed up by a 2017 Federal Aviation Administration report that determined that at least 53 non-conforming parts were missing, with the order that Boeing take remedial action. Barnett additionally claimed that they had to change the locks on the scrap storage section of the facility where faulty or defective parts were kept, because people would continuously grab parts from the storage to install on planes.
Fuck.
You have
They
to
have a
lock
real
up.
problem at Boeing.
You have to lock up the scrap shed because they keep trying to build planes with them.
Just fucking get rid of them, burn
Insane.
them. Stop
It's
this.
like-
Stop them
it's
from
like-
being installed in these planes.
It's like everyone's rats like running around scavenging. Like, no, stop. Get back.
Tony Stark built this Boeing in a cave with a bunch of scraps.
So bad.
Metal shavings. Barnett further alleged that he had discovered what he described as clusters of metal shavings that were erroneously left near electrical systems for flight controls in several 787s. The safety implications of this was that if there were shavings, the implications of this was if the shavings were to penetrate the electrical wiring responsible for powering the flight control systems, the results could have been catastrophic. So, in 2024, Barnett continued to issue warnings about Boeing and their work culture and vehicle safety, particularly following Alaska Airline Flight 1282. Barnett would go on to file an AR-21, which is a law that supposedly protects airline safety whistleblowers against retaliatory actions by employers, with the claim that Boeing had undermined his career because he had raised safety concerns at the Charleston plant. It's worth mentioning he was in an active lawsuit against Boeing, and he was in South Carolina, and on Saturday, he was intended to provide further answers to questioning, but did not show up to the downtown office of Boeing's defense firm for the final day of the 3-day deposition. He did not respond to calls over that day or the following. He was found deceased shortly after in his truck at a hotel parking lot from what Charleston County Coroner's Office described as a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Prior to his death, Barnett reportedly told a family friend that, "If anything happens to me, it's not suicide." Boeing responded to his death by releasing a statement that read, "We are saddened by Mr. Barnett's death and our thoughts are with his family and friends." Barnett's family claimed that he was looking forward to having his day in court and hoped that it would force Boeing to change its culture, though was suffering from PTSD and anxiety attacks as a result of being subject to hostile work environment at Boeing, which we believe led to his death. His lawyer told the CBS News that he was in very good spirits and really looking forward to putting this phase of his life behind him and moving on. We didn't see any indication he would take his own life. No one can believe it. Barnett was found inside his vehicle, bleeding from his right temple, with a silver pistol found in his hand and something allegedly resembling a note in the passenger seat. A groundsman told police that he had heard a pop around 9:24 a.m., but the rain had apparently muffled the sound. Barnett and his lawyers had filed their first complaints in 2017 in Barnett v. Boeing. It seems suspicious, to say the least, that Barnett would commit suicide when his case was finally in the final stretch. A family member told his lawyer, Turkowitz, what was written on the note, but that it didn't sound like John. Which I imagine it didn't.
It sounded like Harry Stonemason or whatever his name was.
Harry Stone Cipher.
Yeah, Stone Cipher.
I think the biggest thing that makes no fucking sense here is not only the timing of it, where he's like in the last phase of this, but also he decides to blow his brains out in the parking lot as opposed to his room. Why? That makes no sense. If he was going to kill himself, it'd likely be in his room, not in the fucking parking lot.
Yeah, that is a good point. I didn't think of that. Maybe he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to create a mess for like the house cleaners or something. And so he figured that his car would be the most...
Well, then he's creating a
I don't
mess
know.
for the tow truck company and every human being that would be walking outside and might see
Yeah.
a blood-splattered window.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why you would choose to do it in the car realistically.
Well, because he didn't
Instead of-
choose to. It wasn't a
Yeah,
suicide
yeah.
that he consented to. It does ultimately seem unlikely that Boeing would plan to murder a whistleblower, but only because there are many other whistleblowers and it would be highly impractical for Boeing to assassinate all of them. There's an interesting connection here where lawyers who drafted Jeffrey Epstein's 2008 immunity deal are also connected to those who created Boeing's, signed January 6, 2021, because Epstein needs to come up in every Red Thread episode somehow.
It's actually crazy that they are connected though.
So, with so many circumstances that serve as evidence of Boeing's malpractice, its failure of 33 of 89 FAA audits, the jammed rudder that caused a near miss in Newark, a wing coming apart on a San Francisco to Boston flight that was forced to make a premature landing, the use of dish soap and hotel room keys to check door seals, and of course, its failure to install a single bolt that would have prevented the door on the Alaskan airline flight 1282 from being ejected from the fuselage, it's impossible to believe that the company would be able to argue it hasn't broken the DPA. But as the DPA is written, the only actual requirements of complying with the DPA are that Boeing cooperate fully with domestic and foreign regulatory authorities in any investigations during the 3 years in which it remains in effect. It's essentially toothless. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
It
Because
is.
the whole thing's just saying like, well, you can make mistakes as long as you let us look at them, and they're like, okay.
Yeah. Or,
Yeah, but-
or you at least pretend to let us look at
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
Yeah, like-
So-
Like with the footage being overwritten and all that.
yeah, there's a piece of paper somewhere that says we looked at them. As long as that happens, we're fine. Yeah.
Boeing maintains that it has cooperated fully and transparently, but that it is unable to provide documents that the agency is seeking because it doesn't possess the documents and, indeed, no longer documents the repairs and procedures the agency is asking for documentation of, in reference to the installation and maintenance of the door. This is further evidenced and backed up by John Barnett's previous claims that Boeing has an internal culture that will aim to avoid any written record of faults and mistakes at any cost, choosing to lose documentation at any chance if it means they won't be held culpable with evidence pertaining to their increasingly lax quality control and maintenance standard. This has all led to the enormous shift in public perception of the company. The once famous phrase, "If it ain't Boeing, I'm not going," is no longer relevant. Indeed, I'll be more comfortable flying an Airbus plane for the foreseeable future when possible. That's
Well, that
Jackson.
that was meant for me.
I won't be comfortable flying any plane.
You'll be slightly more comfortable if you're on an Airbus.
And I don't even
It's
think
definitely possible.
this is another aspect of it. I don't think it is Boeing who would have carried out a hit. It's not like the boardroom got together and had a discussion and said we need to kill this guy. Could have just been a single individual within the company whose career would be threatened by this information coming to light. So he just has it taken care of without consulting
true.
anyone else.
Yeah.
My main hang up with the whole assassination idea, and I agree with you, Isaiah, mostly. I think it's definitely possible that it was something like that. My main hang up with the idea is just how much I think Boeing would have been aware how much noise would have been generated by an assassination on a whistleblower, and I think they would have known that they would have had that kind of perception if that were to occur. So I don't know if it was necessary on their end as well. Like was said in the document, there's a whole bunch of other whistleblowers currently from Boeing. They already have this reputation issue. I don't see why it would be necessary for them when they're pretty much invulnerable anyway.
Necessary is probably not the right word. I feel like the reason they would have killed him in particular is just because of how high profile he. Like, I don't know any of the other whistleblowers. I don't think many of you do, but Barnett was in like the news. He was bringing these problems to the public sphere. Like, hey, Boeing's shit is made out of shit. Like, they're using scrap metal. It's not safe. I wouldn't fly it. Like, this kind of stuff. Like, he was a pretty important figure in getting people more aware of just how like poor their quality was, and he had a very high ranking position. Like, he would be a very strong authority on just how bad their quality control is. So it's someone people would put their faith in to know these things. So I feel like he would be one of those people they'd be afraid of. Now, whether or not they'd necessarily be like, we have to kill him, I don't know, but maybe someone was panicking, like, hey, if this keeps going, if he keeps dropping these, bombshells, we're going to suffer big problems. And maybe someone just, impulsively decided we need to do something about it and decided to kill him. Because it just seems highly unlikely that someone who's right at the end of like a very passionate fight decides to take their own life. And if it's not suicide, then another thing that's equally possible is maybe Boeing started putting out like outside pressure on him, like, hey, threatening his family, we'll do something to them. We'll make sure your family's in financial ruin. We'll make sure their lives are miserable if you don't stop this,
yeah.
that kind of thing. Like they could have
coercive suicide.
Yeah, they could have like coerced him into it. Like they mentioned he was suffering from like PTSD and anxiety attacks. So maybe Boeing plays into that angle by making all of these like bigger threats that like make his anxiety even bigger and greater. So like even if they didn't necessarily get it like fucking Agent 47 out there, like I still think they could have driven him to it, like forced it upon him, which I'd still consider like a hit.
Yeah, that's definitely possible as well.